You're listening to episode 4 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Meditation teacher John Orr joins us to speak about his organization, Mindful Youth. The circumstances in people's lives can lead us in greatly different directions, based on a near infinite history of conditions leading to each and every moment. Sometimes the choices we make bring harm to ourselves and others, but another person with a very similar life story may make positive change in their own life and the lives of complete strangers in need. And when these lives are in the rich bloom of youth, with years of their own actions rippling through the world, the creative potential is limitless. John Orr has been teaching mindfulness meditation since 2003. Recognizing the benefits of the practice in his own life, John began to share what he knew with others, and wanted to continue to do so with anyone who was interested. While John explored the path of mindfulness, his best friend of 23 years continued down a more destructive path that ended in his death at the young age of 26. Having been profoundly impacted by the loss of his closest friend, John felt he could no longer ignore the problems of this world. Fostering his growing sense of responsibility, John felt the population he could most positively impact was at-risk youth, and he has done so in a professional capacity for over 5 years. John remains driven by a sense that, given the right set of tools, he might assist youth in choosing a path that could have a different end than experienced by his friend. Our guest today is John Orr, founder of Mindful Youth. John, welcome to Present Moment.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you here, and I'd like to start by having you tell us a bit about your background and how you first encountered mindfulness.
My first encounter with mindfulness was actually over 10 years ago, and it was somewhat of an interesting journey as to how I got to mindfulness, because I wasn't expecting to get to mindfulness. I was interested in meditation, and I was actually I was going through a period of my life that was marked with a lot of difficulties, and those were difficulties due to substance abuse and later substance dependence. Which I was 10 years sober yesterday.
Congratulations. That's wonderful. Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. And so I recognized that, something wasn't right in my life, and I was searching for something. And, I had some interest in meditation. There was just a draw. And I didn't even know what kind of meditation. I didn't know much about the different types of meditation, let alone mindfulness and all it could offer. But I was living in San Francisco, and I had been doing some research about a place which appeared to be a Native American worship ground. And I thought, wow, this sounds really interesting. And the site wasn't very descriptive. And I just decided one morning to go look for this place. And this place was called Spirit Rock. Now, you and I know Spirit Rock from the meditation center that it is out west. and I went looking for a rock. So, so we could draw a metaphor out of this if we wanted to. It was early one foggy morning. I drove out there and I see signs for this place, and I pull in and I'm looking for a rock, and there's a woman walking very slowly in the parking lot. And I said, I'm not even sure I've ever seen anybody walk that slowly before. And so I said, hey, and this is before I knew about silence or anything on retreats. I said, hey, is there a rock around here? She said, no, there's no rock. This is a meditation center. And I said, oh. And then it dawned on me that perhaps there was a silence that she was not honoring. And she goes, yes, I'm not honoring the silence right now. And so I was intrigued by it. And I just started to do a little bit more research about meditation. And it soon became clear to me that my life was in need of a solution for a lot of the difficulties that I was facing. And so I continued to look into meditation. And within that period of time, I stumbled upon mindfulness, and I also stumbled upon sobriety. And as I looked at mindfulness, I remember when I first read a short description of it, and I said, this, pay attention to your breathing. This is the meditation. I have to be missing something. And I was convinced for a long period of time that, a long period of time, maybe a month or two, that I really was missing something. And so my journey into mindfulness was one that, it began with that really odd circumstantial excursion to a meditation center, which then, spawned my furthered interest. And eventually, I found that mindfulness was what I was looking for. Although at first, I think it was even tough for me to talk about being someone who was interested in meditation, because at that point I was 25 years old and my peer group wasn't necessarily supportive of such a standpoint. I think they were somewhat threatened by it.
And so from that point, your sobriety started essentially at the same time as your mindfulness practice. Did you continue on at Spirit Rock, or did you investigate some other places? What happened next?
Sometimes when somebody's coming into sobriety, it's after they've made a series of poor choices.
Yeah, yes.
And that was my experience. And, while I was living in the Bay Area, I did have a chance to move back to Cincinnati, where I had dropped out of college previously. And it seemed like a much better option than anything I had going in California. And so I came back here, and a lot of my exploration was, connecting with some of the local sitting groups here in Cincinnati, which there aren't a lot of, but they are available. And also listening to a lot of talks that I would hear online. That was a big resource for me as I began my journey. So once in Cincinnati, it was something, it was interesting. As sobriety took hold and I found that, this was a much better way of life for me, the desire to meditate came. And it was strong. And this was before I really had the insight or awareness to recognize like the drives and the intentions behind my actions. And it was just strong. And I don't know if it was just a rebellion against the common ground within the 12-step program, where, people emphasize prayer. It's like, well, if everybody's emphasizing prayer, I need to go the way of meditation. It's unclear to me what the actual drive was, but I have been suspicious, as I do find myself put myself in an outlier group quite often. And regardless, my meditation practice increased. And, what's really interesting about it is that I didn't experience any great results in the beginning, because there was a period where I was just unwilling to discuss, what I was doing, because I was essentially afraid of looking like I was making a mistake, which speaks to a lot of the judgment that my mind was creating for me. That I kept very quiet about my practice, and I would just try in solitude. And I remember making signs around my house, and I thought they were really witty because they rhymed. Like one said, "Stay up late and meditate." And I put it in this cheap dollar store frame. It was fancy, but it was a good reminder because I think that initial discipline is hard to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
And so I had to create some of that. And, I was working in radio at the time. It was a horrible job. The joke about the job is that when it was offered to me and a chimpanzee, and the chimpanzee was overqualified. I was the board operator for the satellite feed of the Howard Stern show here in Cincinnati. And I had to get up at it's ridiculous. I think it was like 4:45 in the morning. I had to get up and get ready to go. And I really thought there is no time for meditation in the morning. And then one day I said, I'm going to try 5 minutes, because I know at night my mind is going all over the place. And I did try those 5 minutes, and I noticed that there was a subtle shift in my day, that there was an ability to manage events in a way that was atypical from how I'd operated my whole life. And that was after only 5 minutes. And so I was pretty darn intrigued at that point. And, thinking as I do, the programming that I was still running off of at that time was I'm not really known for moderation. I said, well, if 5 minutes can do that, well, what could 10 do? And I kept experimenting with this, and I eventually found myself very willing to get up 45 minutes early. I mean, it's still night. It's not even early morning. 4 o'clock in the morning is still nighttime, and I was willing to get up and meditate for 45 minutes just because I was having that much of a difference in my life really quickly. And, at first I was even confused. I said, is this related to the mindfulness practice?
Or is there something else going on and I haven't quite identified what it is yet?
Right. And so I was unsure. I was pretty darn sure that it wasn't just because I was getting up at 4. I was certain that was causing me more suffering. But I stopped for a little bit. There was a little bit of time, and there crept in a dissatisfaction. And I remember talking to my friends, like, gosh, I'm just not feeling as good. And my friends who knew of the meditation practice, because I was becoming more open with discussing it, were very much like, do you think it's related to the meditation? And I said, well, I think it probably is. And I jumped back into the practice, and it was something that, again, I started to find those benefits. And not every day was great. It's not like I woke up and said, yes, the joy of living, this is it. There were days that were still marked with a lot of difficulty, but there was a subtle difference in the way I reacted to that difficulty. And, that was intriguing to me, because my whole life, I wasn't able to conceptualize this in the way that I do now, but I felt as if I was a victim to my own experiences. Like the anxiety and the frustrations and the moods, all of that. And I never felt like I was in full control of that. It felt like that would happen, and I was left to ride out the storm, and I didn't really have anything to help me ride that storm out.
The stories had control, the feelings had control, everything but you had control.
Right. I mean, the stories, the very, very obsessive stories very much had control. And it seemed like the idea of John, me, had spread so far outward that it could never be managed.
So over time, with your ongoing practice, you saw some significant changes, and that progressed over time, and you got to a point where you needed to do something more. Tell us a bit about that, because for many people, they just continue with their practice and that's enough. But you took some extra steps.
I did. Well, I think it'd probably be important to talk about a significant event in my life that changed the direction of my life. I'd mentioned that I was working in radio, and That had its perks, but it also had its downsides. And well, yeah, I had a friend, the person I described as my best friend. His name was Aaron. We met in kindergarten, the first day of kindergarten, and Aaron and I were fast friends. I remember, I mean, in the first, we were in the same classroom all the way up through fourth grade. I remember in the first grade, we made punk rock teddy bears for the Christmas display. We were two peas in a pod. There were no other kids making punk rock teddy bears. And Aaron and I were just great friends. And part of that was the fact that Aaron was just an incredibly nice guy. Aaron, he's intelligent. He's identified at the school to go to all the advanced classes. And he had an understanding of how to manage social relationships really well, and really be caring for his friends. And everyone was aware of this with him. And, he and I, maintained our friendship from the first day of kindergarten through my move to the Midwest, then back to California, then back to the Midwest. We maintained our friendship. And, he was very much my partner in doing all the stuff that happened before sobriety too. And as I got into meditation and got into sobriety, he wasn't able to find a solution in the way that maybe I wished for. When I look back on it now, he wasn't able to see the benefit in some of the stuff that I was trying. And as a result, things got really, really difficult for him. And even with, his strong intellectual ability, his strong ability to care for his friends, and even with the birth of his daughter, he ended up killing himself. He hung himself in his garage, not being able to see a solution. And I'll never forget the day that the phone calls came in. I knew something was wrong because there was far too many people from California calling me at once. And to hear that news, at that point, I think even to this day, I would say that was the worst day of my life. It was the worst news I'd ever heard. And in the wake of it, I've seen, just the pain that this has caused for so many people. I've watched from a little bit of a distance, his daughter grow up, tried to stay in contact with his family. But there was a sense that things could have been different for Aaron if something hadn't happened sooner. If somebody perhaps had intervened sooner with something that could really have been an internal strength. And so I thought about this, and it drove me to change career paths. And I went into the mental health field, and I began working with youth who are identified as at risk. And it was then that I started to dabble with the idea. I said, well, I wonder if meditation could benefit these guys. And at first I thought this was an original idea. Yeah, I'm the first.
No one's thought of this before.
I said, this is going to be big, And well, I had to have my ego knocked down a couple of times. Like, who's this Jon Kabat-Zinn guy? And then I learned about other programs that were out there. And, some of them were pretty darn impressive, including the Mind Body Awareness Project out in Oakland, California. And so, I started to do more and more research, and I actually went to school to become what is called a community counselor, which, I provide mental health therapy for young people. And I became licensed in the state of Ohio. And, that allowed me to work more directly and with a more informed and clinical perspective on how to deliver mindfulness effectively to a group of youth which are often characterized as difficult to reach. And I found that with some of the life experiences I had, and as well as some of the compassion, the respect, and the empathy that had really grown since beginning my mindfulness practice, I had a way of approaching these youth that they were open to hearing about mindfulness and open to hearing about meditation. And so I thought this could be built upon. And in doing so, I never wanted to lose sight of the fact that this was about, a sincere wish and a sincere care for my friend Aaron, that, if somebody had intervened sooner and taught him perhaps about mindfulness, maybe his life wouldn't be over at this point.
Yeah, and it's always these very moving events in our lives, the people we love who suffer and can't find the same way out that we've happened upon, and for whatever reason, the complexity of our lives and our experiences, it may not be the right time for them. One of the things that is very important to bear in mind is that mindfulness is one of many ways to address this. And for people who are listening to the podcast who either are themselves or know someone who is struggling with depression and anxiety, it is important to seek professional help, and that there isn't one magic bullet. There are many different kinds of treatment options and ways to help someone. So please don't hesitate and don't wait.
I fully support you in that statement. I agree that it's not the only option out there, although it's a good one.
It is, and I would suggest that there are several books and research studies that are indicative of how mindfulness can be particularly helpful in the attenuation of recurrence of episodes of depression. And we'll be speaking about that in other podcast episodes. But John, so you started this organization. Tell us more about Mindful Youth and what services you offer.
Sure. Well, Mindful Youth, I started it about, officially, if you ask the state of Ohio, we started maybe 13 months ago, although we were doing things before that. And there was a short period of time, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that we were operating as under a different name, and that was Sinsight. I thought that was a fun name because we were talking about insights and then Cincinnati. And, that came to me one morning, like it was one of those epiphanies. Like I woke up and I said, Sinsight, that's it. And everybody's like, what does that even mean? You mean you don't recognize the epiphany here? And everyone's like, no, we have no clue what you mean. I said, well, thank you for your honesty. I'm going to retreat back to my cave for a short period of time. And when I emerged from my cave, we had Mindful Youth as a name. And Mindful Youth, our mission is to assist youth, especially at-risk youth, to improve the quality of their lives through the use of mindfulness meditation. That's really like the short end of what drives us. But the mission is much more heartfelt than that. When I've thought about what it means to be a parent in this world, what it means to be a person who has a pretty decent understanding of adolescent mental health, there is a feeling of responsibility that arises within me, and Mindful Youth is part of that responsibility. It's one of the things that I'm concerned about is that the children, my daughter is 8 years old, and my designer, the creative director for Mindful Youth, he's become the creative director. His name's Gary. He talked about young people never knowing the world that we knew that was without the internet. And I really thought about, what that means to have all these messages coming in at all times. And do young people have a filter that can identify, hey, is this a good message? Is this a bad message? Do I want to listen to this? Or are we going to be reactive to everything?
And is the fire hose of information itself causing many of the problems we're seeing?
That is one thought I've had many, many a times. And I think there's two sides to the coin. We can get a lot of good information out quickly. But then I do think as human beings, we have a tendency to pull ourselves toward drama, shock, the negative. So if we are not being mindful of just what's coming out, then I think we need to make sure that we as individuals are able to discern just what it is that we want to listen to. And so mindful youth comes from, this connection of, hey, maybe Aaron's life could have been different. Also, this idea that, what is this world, that we're in right now? Where are we going and how are we going to handle it? As well as the fact that mindfulness has been personally beneficial to me. And there's a decent amount of research that supports that it's been beneficial to others, let alone the lineage of 2,600 years of practice. That's a pretty good track record.
Let's talk for a minute about the research that you mentioned. You have several specific papers around mindful practices for youth that are from peer-reviewed research journals. Do you find that validation is helpful to you in your work?
Very much so. If you are anywhere near the current field of mental health, everybody talks about evidence-based practices. That is the buzz term. If it's not evidence-based, then people say, well, what are we really doing here? And, with mindfulness, fortunately, there's a growing body of research. And while the research with children and adolescents is still small, it's still growing as well. And I believe it provides some security and some confidence when parents reach out and they say, well, what is mindful youth? What's driving them? Is this just an idea, or is this something that's really well thought out? And when they see the research page, they can see that, oh yeah, this isn't just some idea that popped up as some guys were eating granola somewhere. It's actually something that has a lot of backing. And I think that the research, it really just provides support to the project, both for, mindful youth and anyone else who's doing mindfulness work. Because ultimately, the goal for mindful youth is not for mindful youth to be around forever. If I can speak for a moment about, what we're calling the Great Initiative. The Great Initiative is, our desire to make Cincinnati a mindful city. When you're doing work with young people, specifically in therapy, there is, a common thought that you can't get any real work done until you bring the family in. And so as we were delivering mindfulness to the young people of Cincinnati, the thought popped into my mind, well, is the same true in this circumstance as we're delivering something to these young people and they go home? If their family doesn't know about it, then, what happens? Is it supported? Is it lost? So we thought maybe the best thing to do is to say that we're going to try to make Cincinnati a mindful city. And what we mean by that, and this is a large goal and it may not ever be achieved in my lifetime, but maybe it will. I would like mindfulness to be known and understood by every family in Cincinnati. So with that, the Great Initiative, right? It's pretty big, but why not go for it? Why not dream big? Because I think that, sometimes we can get so caught up in this practicality of things that we might limit ourselves. And so I've just decided that as an organization, we're just going to go for it. And with that, nothing's untouched. And we need that research that's out there. We need the support of others, and we actually need to collaborate with people. And so mindful youth, once we accomplish this, and maybe we'll only be a temporary vehicle until another vehicle comes along, we'll eventually disappear because we won't be needed. Mindfulness will be known in such a way.
One of the things that I admire most about your work and the work of other groups like the Mind Body Awareness Project and Mindful Schools and others who are working with youth is you're planting those seeds in people who will have an exposure to it early on, hopefully carry that through in their lives, and in turn socialize it with their own kids and see an increase in the awareness of these practices that are helpful to anyone, regardless of what their background is, and shows particular efficacy and assistance for those who need it most, for our at-risk youth. So there is a great appreciation for your work and and those who are doing it. And I think you're absolutely right on the collaboration. And we see a lot of that on your site as you post the research, that in itself is a form of collaboration and sharing the work of the researchers. John, one of the things I want to ask is, what are some of the biggest needs you have right now for that mission?
Well, the biggest need probably for any nonprofit is funding. We're always finding ourselves in a position where we're struggling to find a funding source which is substantial enough to allow us to really operate fully. And the downside of that is that we have had to turn down some opportunities to deliver mindfulness, which is heartbreaking for us because that's everything that we want to do. So, there's an idea that we play around with in our groups, and it's this idea that we're all connected with one another. And so, I'm holding out that the connections with people who might be in support of this are most definitely out there. I just haven't had a chance to find them yet. But funding is something that really, I think that's the standard thing for any nonprofit. So that's a big one for us. But also, we're looking for people who have a mindfulness practice and who are willing to speak out about its benefits. And that could be locally. And I think that the more people that we have who are willing to say, hey, I am a homemaker, but I practice mindfulness and it's great. Or, I'm a CEO and I practice mindfulness and it's great. I would love to have a broad range of people who are willing to speak up and say, this has benefited my life. Because, as I mentioned earlier in our talk, there was that period of time where I was somewhat afraid to discuss my mindfulness practice. And while that was primarily associated with my peer group, it didn't stop there for me. And so, I would like mindfulness to be more well known. And I think that if we had more people willing to speak about it, that would be great too.
Outstanding. Well, the website for those who are listening is www.mindfulyouth.org. Our guest today is founder John Orr. John, thank you for joining us on Present Moment.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Today's quote is from Donald McCown, Diane Reibel, and Mark S. Micosi's book, Teaching Mindfulness, a practical guide for clinicians and educators. Mindfulness practice offers a way of being in which limbic reactivity is reduced, which expands the possibility of observing, approaching, and even exploring in detail difficult emotional experiences, and being receptive to what is happening in the moment with self and others. Further, this is not just a state of mindfulness practitioners during practice. It seems that this can become a trait, a capacity in our everyday walking through the world. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.